セガサターンしろ。セガサターンしろ。
How's it going, everybody? It's SaturnDave, and this is SHIRO Show Friday. We have our guest with us, our special guest from the UK correspondent, the SEGAHolic. How you doing, James?
I'm good, mate. How's yourself?
Literally flying by the seat of my pants.
Yeah, like, I just got a crash course on how to connect to Discord and podcast through it, so that was fun.
Honestly, you've just got a crash course in SHIRO Show because every week is like this. It's like dun 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 da da. You know, it's Mission Impossible, and Pat, like we're just trying. You know,
it's so jank. It's so jank right now. I'm streaming from a city. That's how bad it is.
So yeah, for anybody who's wondering, like, where the hell is Pat? What's up with this kind of cobbled together overlay thing? It's like half old school, half new school. Is what we've got going on. Is Pat is seeing family right now, right, Pat? Pat.
Yeah, I'm in New York City right now, just waiting for reservations. So yeah, right now I am just streaming from the city. Just waiting for a restaurant, so I thought I'd hop in the chat real quick and see what's going on.
Yeah, so glad you could join us at least for a little bit. Yeah, so that's he flew to the East Coast. I'm a little jealous, but it's okay. I'm still back here at home holding down the fort, just like he does when I'm on vacation. And we've got James, who agreed to do this at the very last minute. I mean, like, I did not give him any time. It's actually kind of rude of me to ask you so late, and you're like, let me check with my wife, you know, which is basically the boss. You have to get it cleared with the boss, but you did, so good.
That's it, mate. I mean, you're actually lucky that I opened the DM, because, you know, the time you'd message me, it's kind of like dinner time and kind of bath time and bedtime for the wee one to get her down for the night. So I literally just checked it on the off chance, and I was like, yeah, I'll check with the missus and see if she's good to go. And it all worked out. The wee ones went down about an hour ago, so I'm free here at quarter past 11 almost.
Wonderful.
UK time.
Well,
so
I hope that you stay awake.
Some Sega. I'm good, mate. I'll be fine.
So we had no plan. Not any. We don't really even have that much news to talk about. I think we could plug our respective podcasts, because that's pretty much all that's up on the SHIRO website right now. Was basically, you know, this is the most recent episode that went live. So yeah, SHIRO, we just published an episode that we recorded back in February. Wow, that's how far ahead we are in terms of recording. We recorded this 2D platformer episode back in February, and it just went live to the public, because I guess it went live to patrons like a month ago. But
it's pure gex. The episode is just pure gex.
It's hot, steamy gex. It was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun recording that episode. You guys should definitely check it out on YouTube or Podbean. We talk about a stall. We talk about gex. We talk about what else? Clockwork Night, and we also talk about darn it, Rayman, which I didn't put in the thumbnail because I forgot that we talked about it. And then we also talked about Tri-Rush Deppy as well. So a lot of cool little 2D platformers on the Saturn. Many of them underappreciated at the time because everybody was all about 3D. But it was a fun episode to record, and so you guys should definitely check that out. James, what's the latest and greatest from the Sega Guys?
Well, we've just finished off. We've done the Dreamcast Oscars, which was a lot of fun. You know,
you really leaned into it with the suits.
Mate, that was Dan. To be fair, I mean, he said, you know, I've still got a dinner suit from a wedding I was at last weekend. He said, could you get like a suit and a tie or like a bow tie or something to? When it's the Oscars, we have to tux up. So
yeah,
I remember I text my father-in-law because he was the only guy I could think of that I knew that would actually have that kind of thing. Don't have any kind of formal attire myself, so I messaged him and I says to him, you know, I'm looking for a bow tie. Have you got one? And he says, I've got one. What's it for? I says, it's to do a podcast. He went, so you're not actually going to a social event? I went, no, I'm recording a podcast about Dreamcast Awards. And he just went, I have got one, come and get it after work. It was like,
he's like, I don't even want to ask.
It's not happening. So no questions asked. So I managed to get that, and it went well. We did the kind of Oscar themed kind of the red carpet and the stage kind of background, and we had a lot of fun with it. I mean, the hard part was whittling it down to the number of kind of awards, you know, number of topics, because like we could have had we didn't even do best graphics, we didn't do like best sports game, so it was like best arcade port, best fighting game, best racing game, best puzzle game, things like that. I think there was 8 categories in total, but the plan is to do a Saturn version and a Mega Drive version as well eventually, but I think Dan's actually handed the suit back in, so I'm not sure if you'll have to hire a suit specifically for the occasion. But
yeah, that's funny. I thought one of you guys. I thought it had to be your wedding tux. You know, at least one of you guys. You know, and I was like, that's clever. No,
so,
you know.
So congrats on JoJo winning the best fighting game, right?
Aye. Mate, we didn't even nominate a Power Stone game in that category, which kind of got us a bit of feedback as well, because the way that we worked each category was obviously 4 games in each. So Dan put forward 2, I put forward 2. We kind of hashed it out on WhatsApp and kind of came to a consensus in what we thought the kind of winner was going to be. And it wasn't until we kind of finished and we went, no one mentioned Power Stone in the fighting games. Like,
I know.
It's like total blasphemy. But that's hard. Like anytime you do any kind of listicle with the Dreamcast or the Saturn, I'm just like, you know, it's easy at first because you can easily think of 10 or 20 great games, but then you're like, oh, wait a second, I'm like leaving out like some of the best games, you know. So yeah, that's a tough one. And you're also putting out some racing pods, right? You're gonna be doing some Sega Rally. Yeah, so that was the one that went up on Monday.
Monday, okay.
So what we basically do is, as well as kind of supplement the kind of main podcast, so that goes out every fortnight. So rather than having a blank week in between, you know, Dan's a big fighting game fan, so am I, right enough, but I think Dan's kind of forte is more kind of beat 'em ups. So he's taken on doing playthroughs of fighting games. Whereas myself, I'm right into my Sega Rally. Everybody that knows me knows that. Mm-hmm. So I'm more inclined to go towards the racing game side of things. So from that was born the Sega Guys Fight and the Sega Guys Race. So in those kind of off weeks between the pod, we alternate. So it's like podcast fight, podcast race, podcast fight, that kind of thing. So it's a turn of race to go out, and it's Sega Rally 2, and it's doing quite well. Cool. I think it's a couple hundred views, plenty of, you know, interaction in the comments. So great to see. So it's just about building that kind of portfolio of content so that people that do subscribe know that every single week there's going to be something new on a Monday. So that was the idea behind it.
Nice. It's a great idea. I'm a lot like you. I would go towards the racing games, I'm sure. Not that we're going to... I'm not going to copy your idea, but I would say Pat would definitely lean towards fighting games. He's all about the arcade sticks and the fighting games, and I'm all about the racing games for sure. But that's awesome. So you're right up my alley because I'm watching, because I love racing games and I love Sega. So great stuff. I do enjoy fighting games, but I definitely lean towards the racing stuff. I want to ask you, when it comes to Sega Rally 2, what do you think? Does it live up to what you'd hoped it would be?
See, as I said in the video, the harshest eyes are the ones that can only look back. So it's like, if you've got that kind of hook and nostalgia from owning it at the time, the Western versions are gimped. And I do mention that in the video, you know. Yes. I think they tried to lock the kind of frame rate. There's code you can put in to move it to 60 apparently, but it removes all the kind of foliage and scenery and all that kind of stuff. It's just a bare track. Right. And obviously the kind of very basic scenery. And for me, they just don't work. The Japanese version has... It's not like an unlocked frame rate, but it's allowed to be a lot more variable. So there's points on Sega Rally 2 in the Japanese version where you do see it hitting 60 FPS, but it then will drop down again. So you will still get the stutters, but it's not as harsh as it is on the American, and especially the PAL version, because the PAL version doesn't have a 50-60 hertz switch. You can force it into 60 hertz by running it through VGA, but even at that, it still doesn't come close to that Japanese version, just because it's got a kind of higher upper limit that it's allowed to try and reach. So it's a kind of trade-off. But back in the day, I had a lot of fun with it. But I'm not going to sit here and say that it's better than the Saturn game. I mean, the Saturn original was built from the ground up without using the Sega graphics library. Mm-hmm. You know, the CS team and Mizuguchi overseeing them, you know, to actually build Sega Rally, a Model 2 game from the ground up on the Saturn, to nail that handling that you are on any surface and you feel the difference between tarmac, you feel the mud, you feel the dirt, the D-pad gets heavier without any sensory input. It's an amazing bit of work that they've done. So the Windows CE development, along with the fact that the game was one of the first announced on Dreamcast, so it was, according to SegaRetro.org, it was actually developed in tandem with the hardware. So there wasn't actually the final Dreamcast SDK. So I don't know if that's what has led them to then use Windows CE, which has obviously led to the kind of problems, because, again, as I mentioned in the video, you know, Dreamcast can do 3 million polygons a second, Model 3 does 1, but as Hideki Sato said in an interview with Edge, you know, Model 3 uses squares, Dreamcast uses triangles. You need 2 triangles to make a square, so technically you're getting 1.5 million equivalent to Model 3, so it's 50% more powerful than Model 3, but then you've got VRAM and actual system RAM and all those things to take into account. But whenever you see F355 challenge, whenever you see MSR, you see the Dreamcast could do a lot better than Sega Rally 2 did run. So it's one of those ones that when I play it, I can still enjoy it, but you always play it with that wee bit of regret that, this could have been so much better.
I mean, honestly, Sega Rally, Daytona, and Virtua Fighter 3 TB, those were the big 3 that I had hoped would come, like, you know, when we were going to the arcades and we were seeing Naomi games for the first time, and then we found out that that was coming home and it was almost going to be one-to-one. It was basically going to be one-to-one experience. They would be able to... That was the promise that we were given, you know, for like a decade, that of the arcade coming home, and it was finally happening. And you kind of saw diminishing returns in the arcade to the point where you didn't really need to go to the arcade anymore once the Dreamcast came out, unless it was, you know, those special experiences like Initial D with the driver's license, you know, you know, there were like huge cabinets that you'd like to play in the arcade that had a more tactile, you know, like a big fishing rod or whatever. But for the most part, you felt like, wow, finally, you know, Saturn was great. And did a really good job with a lot of those ports, but finally this is the delivery on the promise. And when we got those 3 games, I was a little let down, but I will say that Sega Rally 2 is probably the best of the 3 in terms of, you know, what it brings home. That's me personally. Hey, I can kick this off as a hot take, I guess, because
as a hot take, mate.
Because personally, I did not like Virtua Fighter 3, the home conversion. I wasn't crazy about it. I loved it in the arcade. Get out of here. and Peter agrees with me as well, you know. Yeah, no, it just like left a lot to be desired for me. And then also like Daytona definitely just felt wrong to me on the Dreamcast. You know, it was like the graphics look great, but they changed the car models and just the vibe of the game just doesn't. I'm just like, they easily could have just ported the Model 2 version, right, and everybody would have been happy. And they eventually did that, you know, on the PlayStation 3, you know. So it's just funny, you know, what we got with Daytona is fine, you know, but it's not great.
I was playing Virtua Fighter 3 last night on Supermodel 3.
Okay.
And I've watched, there's a guy who does comparison videos. I can't remember his name, but he does like kind of retro comparisons between the arcade and the home. And he's got VF3 and TB, and he's synced them up as best he can. Okay. And looking at it, I can't see the difference, right? So I was playing VF3 last night on Supermodel, and obviously TB kind of changes some of the stages. So like Lau's Wall of China stage is a different time of day. Jeffrey's Beach is at night as opposed to during the daytime. Strundy stage, there's meant to be a city in the background, but it's kind of more like a smog that's there across the kind of the river. So there's kind of some subtle changes, but apart from it being a bit more, like, you can see that some areas of the clothing, like Shundi's legs, look as if they're a bit kind of tacked on in places. Mm-hmm. The fingers glitch whenever Akira does his, you know, Mada pokes your eye, you know, that kind of stuff, you know, and he flexes his fingers. There's some wee kind of some wee kind of nuances in the hands and the models that look a bit kind of funny, but you've got to remember, like, Genki were apparently given 6 months to put that port together, and you know, Dan and I call it the Genki Defense Force because, like, again, I imported a Dreamcast literally. I remember sitting there, like, Virtua Fighter 3 was why I wanted a Dreamcast. Sure. Like, obviously, being a Saturn diehard as well, the natural progression was to go there. Of course. You're reading Sega Saturn magazine and you're seeing the kind of the stuff coming through from the new Challenge conference, and you know, Virtua Fighter 3 is coming home, and you're like, oh my god. And when I got it with my Dreamcast in April '99, when I finally got my Japanese console, I was blown away. Like, to have that in your house was just, at that time, like, you were going from playing at that time VF2, which is, you know, one of the absolute best, you know, Model 2 ports on Saturn. Sure. But then you're looking at, like, the best at PS1 was offering at the time, like your Metal Gear Solid, that had, like, faces full of squares with lines for eyes and a wee line for a mouth, and walls that the textures warped, and, like, the shadows were all pixelated, and then all of a sudden you're going to a reasonably good representation of Model 3 in your bedroom. I was like, this is mind-blowing. So I will respectfully disagree.
It really was. It doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel the same, though. Like, visually it's stunning, but it just doesn't feel right to me, you know. And I guess it's just it's hard to really put a point on it. I'll be honest with you, I haven't had a Model 3 to line up right next to my Dreamcast. I mean, I guess I could do that through emulation now, and I have not tried. So but from what I remember, just being so blown away by the Model 3 version, you know, of course what we got on Dreamcast was better, or objectively better than anything we would have gotten on the Saturn if they would have forced that, you know, to happen, you know, via some kind of, you know. So I mean, you know, sure, it was probably certainly better, but for some reason I just didn't feel like it was there for me, and I was just like, yeah, this just doesn't feel like the arcade version. But you're absolutely right, it was visually stunning, you know, and you're absolutely right about the Dreamcast. Like, for folks who are younger or don't know, like, how big of a deal that was, because, again, like, ever since the Master System, I guess, you know, ever since, like, early days with games like Space Harrier. Oh, they brought home Space Harrier on the Master System, and it was a pretty great conversion, all things considered. And then, of course, Genesis, you had Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, or sorry, Mega Drive, present company. But yeah, so you had Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, and you had Streets of Rage 2, you know, and you had games that, what are some great examples of arcade games that Golden Axe,
Afterburner, Outrun.
Afterburner. Yeah. So yeah, those are all great conversions. Considering they're 16-bit, they don't strip that much away. They really leave the experience intact, and that's what it always was with Sega, was nailing the experience. They may have to cut corners on the visuals, but they always got the experience, right? Which brings me to my next hot take, is that CCE, Daytona CCE, is absolute garbage.
I would disagree there, mate. That's are you allowed to swear? That's
sure, you can. Yeah, it's absolute.
Make
ass.
sure that someone else is sure. It's dog shit,
we're
mate.
gonna.
I mean, to be blunt, it's brutal. It's really. It looks great. If you could take that visual style of the courses and then put the visual style of the proper cars in, and then put the right handling in, you'd have like the perfect package. Right. But it's as if they got the Sega Rally team to come in and like rebuild it, and then they just made an arse of it. It was like what?
I mean, we're gonna piss some folks off, because I actually know quite a few folks who really like CCE, but most of them are folks who came to it straight without experiencing the original one first, or like again, like, believe it or not, even back day one when Daytona USA was released on the Saturn, we all knew about the pop-in. It was impossible to not notice. And some of the it isn't something that we're just looking at today and say, oh, that hasn't aged very well visually. No, it was like day one, you popped it in and you're like, wow, there's quite a bit of draw in, and certain things are a little janky, but the experience was there. Even at the low frame rate, that drifting, that really off the rails arcade drifting was there, and it did such a great job of bringing that experience home. My brother and I loved playing that game. And then CCE was like, they put this nice coat of paint on there, but then they went ahead and changed car models, or changed the textures on the cars, which nobody asked for. They changed the music, which nobody asked for. The frame rate was great, but the handling was completely different, which nobody asked for. Literally, it's like, come on. And then they release it on the Dreamcast, and once again, like, they just couldn't get it right. I don't know. That was frustrating for me, because Daytona was like one of the games that made me buy a Saturn, and equally was excited about the Dreamcast,
I mean, that's the thing as well, Dave, about, like, obviously Sega at the start had said that they didn't want to stigmatize Dreamcast as being an arcade port machine, like the Saturn was. But yet all they did, all the press stuff, all the chat with kind of any interviews we're doing, like, as I said, Sato speaking to Edge back whenever Dreamcast was, unveiled, it was all Model 3, and they drummed that message home. This is Model 3 coming home. So it's little wonder that people's expectations went up to here. But then all of a sudden they go, no, we're not going to release arcade ports because we don't want to stigmatise it. So that port of Scud Race that we showed you as a tech demo at the new Challenge Conference, you're not getting that. No. And then Daytona USA 2. How did we get Daytona 2001 but not get Daytona USA 2? It's just... or Power Edition, the one after that. Yeah. Which has got Mizuguchi's vocals in fine form as well. And they add a kind of more traditional Daytona track to the start. It's more of a kind of oval. Right. Whereas I think if I remember in the original Daytona USA 2, it's like it's this weird kind of dome that kind of goes from like a tarmac track and goes through a kind of jungle area and stuff like that.
Right,
just, I don't know what Sega were on whenever they made... Like, because like Scud Race and Daytona 2, it's like lots of tunnels with fish and stuff like that behind windows with full of... I don't know,
it started with Daytona, right? And you had the 777 track, right? And it was it's the closest thing, and it's even really not close at all to the real Daytona, Indianapolis 500, right? But I mean, it's the closest thing to like an oval circuit track, right? And then it just Dinosaur Canyon, and it just gets crazier from there. And then by number 2, they were just like, forget it. We're not even going to try to pretend that this is anything like NASCAR or stock car racing. It's literally, you're just racing stock cars in the jungle. you know, but that's what was so crazy about Sega is they were off the wall with that kind of stuff. You know, it wasn't grounded in reality, and that made it great. You know, a lot of those arcade games were awesome like that. I don't know. No, somebody asked, is this a Dreamcast podcast? No, but we love the Dreamcast, so we end up talking about it.
We'll just go everywhere because like I've got a list of hot takes that I wrote down. And someone in the chat also went, how are these hot takes? It's just an opinion. Well, a hot take is an opinion, so... Well,
okay, so that's fair. We even said, so this is very much no script, and I even said to James, we might end up talking about whether these even count as hot takes, because if enough people agree, then it's not really a hot take, right? But yeah, so go ahead. You hit me with what's your best hot take in regard to the Saturn?
Right, well, this is one that we're actually going to do a full pod on, okay. But we can go into it a wee bit here. So, and given the kind of feelings towards this system, it kind of has its fans, but it's also got people who are quite critical of it, and rightly so. So, the 32X should have been binned and never have happened, which I think we can all agree on. But Sega should have then taken the games that they launched with the 32X, made them for Saturn and launched it in Christmas '94, giving them a head start of a year on the PlayStation. You would have had more stock because the 32X uses two SH2s like the Saturn. So for every 32X made, you were losing a Saturn. You would have had the best console version of Doom. You would have had Star Wars Arcades. You would have had proper Virtua Racing, not the shitty Time Warner version.
Hey now.
Oh,
so I don't disagree with you about the fact. So like, I think they're both good. Honestly, I think they're both good. And the folks at Time Warner did an amazing job considering they didn't have the source code. But yeah, you're and it adds a lot of content. So the argument there is that they give you a ton of extra content as collateral. But you're right that when it comes to the controls, the 32X one is like, you know, it feels like the arcade for sure, you know.
Yeah.
But so I just say, but yeah, so 32X bin. Do you think that's a hot take? I mean, I think a lot of people agree with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, like, Tom and Al would agree with it as well. I would think after speaking to them as well. But I mean, it's got its fans. There are people who do enjoy it, and it did sell well.
Yeah.
In North America, it did. It flew off the shelves initially, and then it just kind of came shudder to a halt as people started to realise they should have been holding off. But I just think if they had held off that little bit, launched a year early, would have given them time to flesh out Daytona, flesh out Virtua Fighter 1 a little bit, although I love the VF1 port on Saturn anyway, but it's one of those kind of sliding doors moments whenever you think that they were kind of almost cannibalising their own stock.
Oh, definitely.
By having this add-on kind of bastardised across the pond. So, there we go. I mean, again, not maybe so much a hot take, but as a discussion point, and I think it's something that, as I say, we're going to go into it in a kind of lot more depth in a later kind of podcast as well.
Yeah, it's a great idea. It's actually, funny enough, it's one that I've been meaning to get on Editor's Corner for a while, and I just haven't lined everybody up because I want to get Trekkies. So you've got my friend Andrew Mastercast TV. He's a huge 32X fan, right? Also, Genovi is a huge 32X fan. They love the console. I think they're probably realistic enough about the fact that it hurt Sega more than it helped them, but they love the console, right? And then you've got like Trekkies, who I don't think he hates the console, but I think he definitely is one of those. He totally agrees with you. It was terrible for Sega, hurt them, and it's common sense, you know, that it shouldn't have been released, you know. So I kind of want to get an argument, not an argument, but a healthy debate going about, you know, pros and cons and stuff like that. But I mean, definitely it cannibalized their own audience. It didn't help, you know. It's just that now there are folks in hindsight who kind of love it ironically, or, you know, love it for what it is, kind of the same way folks like the Jaguar, you know. There like there's a handful of games on the Jaguar that are decent, you know. And I don't know, maybe 10 games, I could probably name, I don't know, 10 might be too much, but there's a handful of Jaguar games that are worth playing. And I don't know if that justifies ownership of the console, but there's definitely folks out there who are like nuts for more proprietary or the more bizarre that it is. And I don't know, it doesn't get much more bizarre than like that mushroom cloud attachment on the Genesis, you know?
I mean, I remember I went to a friend who had got a Jaguar, and he handed me the controller. And if I remember, you used to get, along with the cartridge, you used to get like an inlay that would sit over the buttons, because it had like a telephone keypad in the middle with all these bloody buttons. And you had to get these overlays to go on top of it that actually told you the controls for each. And it was Alien versus Predator. And I was like, the game looked great at the time, but I just couldn't control it with that bloody monstrosity of a controller. Yeah,
it's terrible. That controller does not feel good. And I've people who defend it, like, I'm just like, how can you defend it? I mean, like, I own a 3DO and I quite like the console, but the pad is garbage. So it's like, if I'm thinking about playing Gex on the 3DO or on the Saturn doesn't look as good as the 3DO version, but you get the Saturn pad, which is great, right? So it's like, that's a compelling argument to play the Saturn version, you know? But yeah, so that the Jaguar controller is ass. I don't know how people defend it. I really don't. But yeah, I mean, you know, so yeah, we might piss some folks off, but again, you know, it's the 32X is strange. And then even worse is when they, you know, started making games where you had to have both the 32X and the Sega CD or the Mega CD. So you'd have the cart and the CD in there, you know, and that was just crazy, you know. So okay, let's see here. I'm gonna go into the SHIRO Discord, because well, you know, if folks want to mention like a hot take in the comments, I'm more than happy to go through and see if we can read off some of your guys' hot takes. Let's see here. I want to pick on somebody in our Discord chat. Let's see here. Pick on Dan. Maybe.
Scotty saying Jaguar controller, the Duke before the Duke. That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah.
The Duke before the Duke.
There's a lot of rally and Daytona conversation here in this. All right, hit me with another one of yours, and I'll think of one. I'll think of another one while we're talking about your next one, because I know you had a bunch.
Right, I'm trying to. What will we go with here then? What will we go with? Right, again, this is probably just opinion, right? But I think that Last Bronx on Saturn is the greatest technical achievement of that generation.
You think that's true? Yeah. Oh, okay. I agree with you. Actually. Yeah. So I don't know if that's a hot take or not. Is that finished? So yeah, I thought you were saying I thought you were saying that other people think that and you think that's ridiculous. No, I agree with you, actually. I'm a huge fan of Last Bronx, and I think that it's a great I think that's really, like, aside from being incredibly popular in Japan, that's like one of the things it does best is just show off all the cool things that Saturn could do with, like, VDP2, you know, all those different tricks, you know. Oftentimes it's like, unless you're looking at the arcade version directly next to the Saturn port, it's sometimes hard to you know, recognize which one is which, because the Saturn one is so impressive visually. Yeah. And it's a great controlling game, and to be honest, it's one of my favorite fighters on the Saturn, if not my favorite. So yeah, great take.
who's your go-to? Who's your character?
I like Yoko. I do.
Really?
I do. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, who's your favorite? Kurosawa. Yeah, with the big stick.
Yeah,
you just like that. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that take is too hot for Bunny. Oh, Dan, does Bunny not like that game? Oh, you know, you guys are they're big fans of Fighting Vipers. So
aye, Fighting Vipers is good in terms of, you know, it's also runs at a lower resolution. but that's because it has to get the lighting effects into the lighting effects that are on Fighting Vipers are absolutely brilliant. You know, it's you go whenever you're fighting Sandman, it's like kind of sunset. It's got that nice kind of orangey yellow kind of glow to it. You fight Jane, and she's up in that kind of looks like an abandoned kind of top floor of like a building, and the windows are smashed out, and there's lights from the street coming in and stuff like that. So no, Last Bronx is obviously high resolution mode, 60 FPS. The ring doesn't float. Like obviously VF2, which is amazing. I absolutely love VF2, but there's kind of wee elements of that, like the ring floating and things that whenever you play in obviously Last Bronx, and even in Fighting Vipers as well, that you don't get that kind of everything looks all joined together. And that subway stage in Last Bronx, whenever you just look at the ceiling and it just goes for miles on the platform, it's just everybody kind of at the time says, and it's a kind of myth that some people or YouTubers, you actually see them repeating wrongly. It's that Last Bronx it's the first Saturn fighting game with fully 3D backgrounds, and that's testament to what a job
because they're
VDP
not
1 and 2 are doing, because they're not. They are not.
But they
2D,
fooled.
But
It's like people fool. I think people are mostly misremembering it, because if you look really closely, you can tell that it's not. But I mean, I think that it did a good enough job that people remember it as being like fully 3D, especially that scene in the underground, in the subway or the tunnel or whatever. It just the ceiling and the floor, it just looks great, and they have the CRTs there, the big chunky CRTs. This is a really hot take, and actually it's one that a lot of people share. I don't know how, so Knight of Dragon says his hot take is that Panzer Dragoon Saga sucks. And actually, what's funny is he's not the only one who has a really hard time with this game. Mel doesn't really like the game either. And even then, he's like forced himself to play it and has kind of come around on it. But it's not, like a first love or anything. He returned the game when he got it, and he returned his copy and then had trouble finding it until later, it's definitely a hyped game. I will say that, and of course, it's hard to justify any kind of price that people are charging for it in terms of UK or PAL or NTSC versions of it, But yeah, what do you think about that?
The Panzer Dragoon Saga is a game that I get kind of up in my kind of soapbox about, because back in '98, whenever it was kind of previewed and it came out, and obviously Disc 1, somehow Richard Ledbetter got it on the front cover of Sega Saturn magazine. So within 10 minutes of me playing that demo, I went on to Gameplay, which was a kind of mail order telephone kind of order kind of games company, and I pre-ordered it, and it was $37.99, and I loved everything about it. I know you went from kind of Panzer Dragoon, which was that obviously on rails shooting, more action based, but I think Saga, as someone who doesn't particularly enjoy JRPGs, I don't like Final Fantasy. I'm not a fan of it at all. So for me to actually sit down and finish that back in the day, to enjoy it the way I did, I just love the battle mechanics that they somehow managed to take. That kind of obviously, you press the shoulder buttons on the first two games and you can switch your view around. They implemented that in a way into the battle system with the weak points. So you've got your safe zones and your weak point. So you to hit the enemy, you have to go into the red zone, fire off whether you do your chain lasers or your berserks or whatever like that, and then get the hell back out of dodge. The exploration didn't feel forced. It didn't feel as if like Final Fantasy VII, you're walking about that open world, you would go 2 foot and it would go another fucking fight, here we go. It's like I'm fed up with these battles, and it's like I think Panzer Dragoon Saga was a very user-friendly RPG. It mixed the battle elements well. The morphing of the dragon to mix your abilities was really, really clever. But I think today the problem I've got is that Panzer Dragoon Saga is overhyped because of its rarity. It's an absolutely fantastic game, but it's not worth what people are now asking for it, as you rightly said at the start there before we began talking about it. But it's like, for a lot of people now, it's becoming more of a trophy, and they care more about the clout of having it on a shelf or to take a picture on Twitter than to actually play it. Like, I can load it on my Fenrir. I bought it when I pre-ordered it. I sold all my stuff in 2007. Whenever me and my now wife bought our first house, I sold everything that I had. So I don't need all this old stuff. I've got an Xbox 360. I don't need this. Idiot. So, yeah. But, you know, it's like I can load it on Fenrir, as I do now, and I can listen to that intro music. I can hear the title screen music, you know, Behold the Glorious Wings, or Behold the Precious Wings. Beautiful track. And I can be instantly taken back to whenever I first played that disc on Sega Saturn magazine. Yeah. So my feelings towards Panzer Dragoon Saga are very different than someone who... Like, if someone shells out £500 for Panzer Dragoon Saga today, I think they are going in with a different set of eyes and a different level of expectation to people who played it in '98 whenever, let's be frank, no one cared about it. It wasn't given any promotion. It was one of the last run games on the Saturn, hence why it's so rare, because the run was so low. So don't get me wrong, I love the game, still love the game. I'll always make a point of once a year trying to kind of go through it.
Oh, nice.
And it's a nice, laid back. The pace is good. As I say, battle mechanics are great. So, I mean, if people don't like it, that's fine. If they wanted Panzer Dragoon 3, which obviously we got, or on Xbox, which went back to the kind of action roots, then fine. But no, I love Saga.
Well, I mean, I can't. I mean, that is definitely a hot take, I think, because I think it's a magnum opus. Honestly, I think that it's an amazing achievement on the Saturn. It's a wonderful game. Played it multiple times, and I didn't want to like it when it came out. I didn't think that it was possible. Like, I was very much against the idea of turning Panzer Dragoon into an RPG. When I saw the screenshots in OSSM, I was not sold. I was not convinced that this could work. You know, it just looked. It looked clumsy, or it looked kind of like forced. I don't know. When I finally played the game, and I was just like, aha, you know, I had a moment where I was just like, I get it. This is amazing. You know, the models, all the, you know, enemy models and everything like that were stunning. Like, the texture work was amazing. The way that it made you feel, the way that the game made you feel, and really helped crystallize that world building, you know, because you had some world building in the first two games, but really that's where a lot of the mythos and a lot of the world building comes from, is Saga. It just did an amazing job of creating that mood and that vibe of, you know, deserted wasteland, and you know, the way the map was. I don't know, I'm kind of speechless about the game, but honestly, I think it's a wonderful game. I think everyone should play it. I think nobody should even care how much it costs, because I don't think that should stop you from playing it. Same way, I don't think that the price of Snatcher should stop you from playing Snatcher. One of Hideo Kojima's best games, I think. I love Snatcher, and I play that game like once a year, and I don't own a copy, and I probably never will, you know, at this point. But I mean, definitely the price of the game shouldn't have anything to do with, you know, how good it is. But yeah, for someone to straight up say that it's trash, that is a hot take. I do want to mention Dan did say that he thinks Fighting Vipers is better than Virtua Fighter 2, and I'm just like, okay. I can't agree with you there, and I do think that's a hot take, but I'm not surprised, because I know Dan is a huge Fighting Vipers fan. So,
well, we got Fighters Megamix, so we can.
We got Fighters Megamix. Yeah, there you go.
You know,
sometimes
best of both worlds.
Yeah, sometimes I think people just like certain games for nostalgic reasons, or you know, they have certain attachments to a game that go beyond how well it performs, or, you know, how much of a technical achievement it is, you know. And Fighting Vipers is actually a really good game. It's slept on a lot, you know, and it's still not that expensive, you know, in terms of games for Saturn, you know, so folks should definitely check it out. But what else have I missed?
You were saying there about, you know, obviously different people have got different attachments to different games. It's like I think Virtua Cop 1 absolutely pisses on Virtua Cop 2. But You know,
It-
Dan is of the opposite opinion. He loves
Okay.
Virtua Cop 2 because of the kind of the larger scale and the branching paths. But I just think
I
the
know what you
visual
mean.
style of one, there's this iconic visual style of one. It just
It's very
the
solid.
soundtrack's just so good, so good.
I can understand what you mean. That like sometimes the more you add, the more you lose the message. You know, the more you lose like the original focus of what it is. You know, and Virtual Cop 1 is or Virtual Cop is it is just very pure. You know, and it's very much like that arcade experience. Virtual Cop 2 brings it brings some improvements here and there, but it is just more busy. You know, I don't know. It honestly, it offers more content. It offers more value, I guess you could say, for people's dollar. And back then, that made a big difference, especially with arcade games. The big argument in magazines is, you know, oh, it's only got 3 tracks or it's only got this many levels. You know, and that was over on PlayStation, they're putting out these epic, sprawling, 50 to 80 hour campaigns, and so people would argue about like, how much game are you getting here? Of course, with something like Sega Rally, we can all laugh because we're still playing it today,
Mate,
we're still trying to shave
Sega Rally.
Yeah.
They'll be playing Sega Rally in 20 years' time when nobody's playing Forza Horizon or Gran Turismo,
True.
so there we go.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Somebody said, Malenko said that G Vector is better than Stellar Assault. Now, I don't know if he was just trying to piss Dan off or if he really believes that, but G Vector is not bad, but it's no Stellar Assault, that's for sure. G Vector is kind of like an on rails, just you're going through a trench, kind of like, Sylph-Heed kind of shooter. Not really though. It's more like first person perspective. Whereas, Stellar Assault, you have really free range of motion, it's completely 3D. I would have to go with Stellar Assault, especially now that it's been completely
that patch
localized, right? Yeah.
Oh, what a job that is. Absolutely superb.
Oh my God. Dan is going to throw down right now with Malenko in the chat.
Just seen Dan Thrax there saying House of the Dead was great despite the messy graphics, and he's absolutely spot on. Now,
yeah, definitely.
I was exchanging comments like well over a year ago, and it was on a Manx TT video, and I went back to try and find it, and I think they've been deleted. The guy I was speaking to claimed that he was a developer at Tantalus at the time. So somehow we were talking about Manx TT, because obviously Tantalus done that, and then I kind of started talking about House of the Dead in the comments, and
right.
The job that they done in Manx TT. It's a shame that standard wasn't carried over to House of the Dead, as much as it does capture the feel of the arcade. It is a very messy looking game,
right?
And this guy came back and he was talking about like Psygnosis obviously had a hand, and they were play testers. They're actually in the credits.
Right.
Of Manx TT. So he was talking about, how they were kind of play testers for that, speaking about the relationship they had with them, and I rattled off the kind of names of some of the people that were in the credits, and this guy was he wasn't nice and he wasn't good. And then he mentioned in reply to me talking about House of the Dead that they were given 3 months to port that to the Saturn.
Yeah. It was
I was like,
some of those deadlines are ridiculous. Yeah, some of the deadlines.
I can't find the comments.
Thank you for the $2, Malenko. I'd let Dan win. Okay. No, you're absolutely right, though. House of the Dead. So at PRGE last year, we had a large CRT. I don't know, it was like a 27 or 32-inch CRT, right? Set up with House of the Dead, 2 light guns, right? That was that was like a magnet during that whole show. Like, folks didn't care about the graphics. They kept jumping on that and waiting to play it because everybody was having fun, Like, if you see other folks having fun with a game, it's attractive, you know what I mean? And like it was just I was just looking at it and I was thinking, like, this game is just solid, from an experience. Again, it's that issue of just bringing the arcade experience home. No, they didn't nail the visuals. They probably could have done better if it was in the hands of like Team Andromeda. Sure, if it was in the hands of AM3 or whatever, AM2, They could have made it look better, but they did a pretty good job, you know. Same with Manx, you know, like I think Manx TT Superbike is a great conversion. Doesn't look as good as the arcade original, but again, it's excellent. I love it. It's a little wanting for content, of course, you know. You can race the course backwards and you can race as a sheep, but I mean, again, you know, one more track could have, you know, really helped, but so I don't play Manx these days as much as I do like Sega Rally, but I still really appreciate it and think it was a good port. So yeah, I agree with you. That might be a hot take just because there's so many haters on House of the Dead out there, or like Saturn House of the Dead. But the great thing about Saturn House of the Dead is for such a long time it was an exclusive, like a home exclusive, right? You know, we did. It took forever, you know, for them to like release that in any form, you know.
I mean, it's what you said as well, though. Like, obviously, all the way back to Master System, they would bring a game home. Obviously, Tantalus done House of the Dead, but that kind of Sega mantra of we'll still try to bring it home. It might not look how you see it in the arcade, but by God, it will feel the same. Right. And I think that's always what, up until like kind of Dreamcast, whenever you were starting to see the visuals kind of surpass the arcade in a way, but. You know, they always nailed the feel. It's a bit ironic that whenever we got to Dreamcast, we got the visuals but lost the feel. You know, it's almost like it
absolutely.
Flipped. It went, so.
Okay, here's a hot take. Scotty Mo for show, who also streams on Twitch, and folks should check out his stuff. He says that Sonic Jam is the best Sonic collection released to date. What say you about that? I'll be honest with you. Like, I kind of agree with him, and I know I'm going to catch flack for that. There are a lot of ways you can play Sonic. I mean, I have many of them, whether it's on the console itself with a regular cartridge, or an EverDrive, or if it's Sonic Jam, or on the Wii, the Wii U. Like, you can literally, I even have it on the DS. You know, it's terrible there, but I mean, you could play it on your phone. Sonic Jam is pretty solid, though. I don't know if it's fair to say it's the best ever, but it's definitely great. And folks need to check out. Here's a big mistake that folks make when they fire up Sonic Jam. They fire up Sonic Jam, pop in the virtual cartridge or whatever, and they choose original mode, which is precisely the exact code that you got on the original cart, right? You know, so it's just, you know, it's just as hard as the original one was, and it's just, you know, whereas if you put it in normal mode, which I'm sure some people are confused about that. What's normal versus original? Well, normal was the vision that they had for cleaning them up and kind of tuning them up and kind of, I guess you could say, releasing them as a quote unquote HD remake. They're not really up-resed at all. But the fact is, they add some things here and there, and they also kind of tune the difficulty a little bit. And I think that folks should definitely check it out in normal mode instead of just going with original, because I think that's kind of like people's de facto choice without thinking about it. They're like, oh yeah, well, why wouldn't I want anything but the original? But you're kind of missing the point of that release then if you're doing that. You might as well just play the cartridges, you know?
Sonic Jam might not have the wealth of content in terms of like Master System games and Game Gear games like you're getting with the kind of Origin stuff, but at 3D World, yeah, I know it's quite small, and there's the collect 100 rings and a certain amount of time and do your kind of lap. But the fact you've got like the art gallery, you've got the theater. Yeah,
you got the theater. You got Sonic World with little run around area. Yeah,
like I remember, like that was the first. Whenever I got Sonic Jam on the Saturn and went into the kind of movie theater, that's the first time that I'd heard Toot Toot Sonic Warriors.
Yeah,
and like I have loved that tune ever since. Obviously for the Japanese version of Sonic CD, but I know Sonic Boom is good, but Toot Toot Sonic Warriors is far better. That might be a hot take, I don't know, but I just, you know, we're turning all opinions into hot takes now, Dave. That's the problem.
Well, now, okay, so at the time, Sonic Jam didn't do great because for a couple of reasons. First of all, everyone wanted a 3D Sonic
3D.
game. So it felt like a slap in the face. Take this instead, right? Also, it was a little too soon, right? I mean, here we are. The Genesis or the Mega Drive itself was alive until and receiving games until like 96, 97, you know? And so it was like games like Sonic and Knuckles, Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles were just recently released on that system. And then here you're getting it. If you look at it on its own merits, you're getting Sonic 2, Sonic 3, Sonic and Knuckles, all of that extra content taken on its own merit, and forget the price, what it costs nowadays. It's actually a really great little package, you know, if you're just judging it on its own. But the time that it was released, it was just kind of perceived as just like, well, first of all, it was last gen. It was literally just the previous gen, you know, and not what anybody was really, you know, interested in playing, you know. So that's why it didn't do so well. But I mean, nowadays in hindsight, I think it's great. You know, it's just, it's a lot of content on one disc, you know, and I think it's quite cool. And
you get easy mode, which my daughter plays it, and
that's true.
She thinks that she's getting further in the game because
that's
she doesn't
actually
have to go through all 3 acts of each zone.
You're right. Actually, that's how I got my son started on Sonic, was with the easy mode on Sonic Jam. And it was like training wheels for him, which is funny. We didn't have that. It was just like, here's a hard game, slap you in the face. You're just going to sit in front of the TV like 2 feet away from the screen, and you're going to play it over and over again until you get good. You know, that's just what it was for us. But yeah, for my son, it was easy mode on Sonic Jam that really got him into Sonic. And then from there, I just kind of let him play it on different platforms, whether it was like the Wii Virtual Console or whether it was the real thing, you know, and he loves it now and actually does quite well with it. But it was that got him into it. So there you go. Kay thinks that hot take is a hot take, that it's overrated and we shouldn't be using that term. Again, folks, we just came up with this idea right before the show, okay? Because we didn't have any content. So we're just chatting Saturn.
I got asked to come on here with like 2.5 hours notice. You know,
no kidding.
Like...
No kidding. You did me a solid here. I owe you one now, and you know, I'll try to make good on that at some point. Let's see. Exhumed or Power Slave for NA North America, I guess, is underrated. I don't think that's a hot take at all. It is a brilliant game. It's not known by a lot of folks, but there has been somewhat of a resurgence just because of the Night Dive, you know, version. So, you know, folks are coming around to it. But yeah, it's a brilliant game, kind of a Metroidvania kind of thing. Excellent graphics, best on Saturn. Forget the PlayStation version. You know,
that Slave Driver engine is just ridiculously good.
It
honestly.
Really is. Oh my god! And
why?
It's one of those games. It's one of those games you really want to plug it into like a hi-fi surround, you know, like Dolby system, you know, and just the gunfire and like the sounds of the Egyptian tombs or whatever, you know, that music, you know, and the sound effects and stuff. It's great. It's a sensory experience. Folks should definitely play it like in the dark with the music turned up to 11. It's awesome. Let me see here. Anybody else want to give us a hot take? Sorry if I missed it. I'm trying to scroll up and see if I missed anything, but you can always, because we've got another. If you got to jump off, I understand. I completely understand. It's super late where you are.
I mean, here's one, right? Again, might not be a hot take, right?
Okay.
But every time we kind of put any tweets out about the kind of Saturn launch, whenever we had Tom and Al coming back on and we were kind of putting little clips out, you know, obviously Tom doing the kind of the enforced Saturn launch, right? And people there's always some smart ass PlayStation fanboy who drops in the $299, right?
Yeah.
Sony are very much accused, and Peter Moore used the term FUD, you know, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which is what they're continuing to do it even today with this whole Activision and Blizzard nonsense that's going on. But this whole 299 was the birth of Sony's FUD. Because, right, and I've always hated the fact that nobody ever called that out, right? Because straight away, it was very clever. You know, Steve Race goes up there and just goes $2.99, and then that's it. But do you get a game? No, that's 50 quid. Can you save games on it? No, that's another 30 quid for a memory card. So the gap wasn't $100 or 100 quid, which has annoyed me since my teenage years.
But they couldn't get back up on stage and be like, but wait, you know, it was like their turn was over, you know.
That's it. Honestly, Tom marching back on from behind the curtain. Wait a minute. It's like,
I don't know what I mean, like, Sony was just brilliant to poach him from Sega, honestly. And I don't think anybody, this may or may not be a hot take, but I don't think anybody really gives or talks about Steve Race and how much of a difference he made to Sega pre-Saturn, you know, and how much of a difference it made when Sony got him, you know, because Sega's marketing completely changed, you know, and the way that they, you know, it's like they were scrappy during the Genesis Mega Drive years, and they were winning over market share, and they were just really, their advertising was just really effective, you know, and then it just became completely impotent after they lost Steve Race. And Sony, of course, having Steve Race, you know, they picked up a lot of that stuff. You know, they're like, these were great ideas, you know, let's steal them, you know. And again, they did, you know, and I don't think anybody gives that enough credit, you know, or talks about it enough. It was a huge deal that they lost Steve Race, you know. Unfortunately, I think that Sega should have done whatever it took to hold on to him, but
that's pretty much what Sony have done since they came into the business. So they've literally just, whatever Sega done in terms of marketing and things like that, they just took those ideas and threw a lot more money at it.
They could just keep throwing money at problems. Exactly, you're right.
You know, so.
And Nintendo has money, but they like to hold on to it. They don't like to spend it. That's their thing, you know. Nintendo has like cash reserves for days or for ages, really. But yeah, they've always been a very, you know, reserved Japanese company, you know, from a business standpoint, and they don't really like spending money. They like working with off the shelf parts, and, you know, working with older stuff, you know, really squeezing as much blood as they can out of a turnip in terms of hardware and stuff like that. And again, like, it doesn't matter because they've got these solid franchises that people will play it on a potato. You know, they'll play Zelda on whatever you give it, you know. Sega didn't really have that. They had a bunch of brilliant franchises, but unfortunately, they were determined to not use any of their franchises on the Saturn. No. And then they're like, for the Dreamcast, they did it again. They're just like, yeah, all those brilliant franchises, let's just go in a new direction and give you semen.
Oh my God. I mean, there's something Scotty in the chat says as well. Doesn't know if this is really a hot take, but Saturn 3D controller is better than Dreamcast controller. Yes, you are spot on.
Oh, you are, absolutely. I mean, look at the Dreamcast controller. Okay, so
Dave's in Blue Peter mode. Here's one I prepared earlier.
So I did not, you know, but yeah. So it's like people talk about the Dreamcast because of the Hall sensors, you know, or like, I mean, I don't dislike the Dreamcast controller, but I think what I love about it is all based on nostalgia, you know, versus like practical. Like, I don't like the fact that it beeps at me every time I turn on my console. I don't like the fact that the VMUs suck battery so fast and constantly have to be replaced. I think that I thought that it was neat for a second that the cable comes out of the bottom. This many years later, I hate it. Just like, so yeah, it was very cool when I got it out of the box and was like, oh, that's different. Yeah, well, for a reason. Nobody else thought that was a good idea, you know? What else? This D-pad just blows. This D-pad is terrible.
That's awful. How loose are your D-pads on your Dreamcast controllers? Like, they just, like, that Saturn 3D controller still feels as clicky as when you got it, but the Dreamcast ones just get really, really loose.
It's funny, considering they owned this, you know? And why would they? Why? I don't understand why they would go to this. Like, because that just made this controller basically useless for fighting games. You know, they had this wonderful, wonderful D-pad that came from the Japanese Saturn pad, and they brought it over here to the 3D control pad, and it's perfect. And you've got these buttons. Arguably, this controller is great for any kind of game. You know, even if you put it in digital mode, you've got so like, I only have 2 wired pads hooked up. One's the Japanese D-pad, you know, and the other one's this one. So it's like if my son is playing a fighting game with me, one of us just takes this and nobody complains. It's not like the crappy controller that you give your friend when you want them to lose. You know, it's like this is just as good. You know, I can reach all these buttons and do combos really quickly. And these shoulder triggers, the shoulder triggers are great for racing games, of course. So, you know. That's crazy.
The build quality is definitely better on the 3D controller. Like, again, I think a lot of the kind of... I don't have any issues with the Dreamcast controller, but I think, like what you said, Dave, there's a lot of it kind of rooted in nostalgia. Yeah. You know, whereas, like, if I have a good run on Crazy Taxi and I'm playing that for, like, 45, 50 minutes... Like, when I come off, I've got claws for hands.
Oh, yes.
You know, at the end of it, it's like...
Yes. Yes, you do. You it's true. I mean, actually, even the 3D control pad, when I'm playing nights for long score attack sessions and I'm really trying to like improve my own best score, I do end up getting like cramped and thinking like I'm going to have carpal tunnel or something like that. But I will say there's one thing about this. So you had this little nub here with the 3D control pad. Sometimes mine, and I probably can't get it to do it right now, but sometimes it gets stuck. It gets stuck in that position right there. And I probably need to tear it apart. But the Dreamcast one doesn't do that, I will say. So there's one thing the Dreamcast has going for it is I don't believe that this analog pad has ever gotten stuck in a position or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I also don't like the fact that Dreamcast opted for like the SNES Diamond button arrangement. You know what was wrong?
Made the buttons a lot smaller as well. You know, it's like compared to the 3D controller.
Right. Yeah. So you have other consoles like the Switch that have like really tiny buttons. You know, or even like when I first got my DS, that was tough because I was used to like a Game Boy with the big buttons. You know, and you get the DS and it's like the buttons are really tiny, and it took a while to get used to. But yeah, like what was wrong with like the arcade? Were they just trying really hard to move away from their arcade heritage? Because this 6-button layout is perfect for arcade games, you know, and I just don't understand. Like
when it comes to Dreamcast, Dave, you were saying that why did they make that decision? It's because they were stuck in this mindset of needing to not be Sega.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
In effect, the Dreamcast is Sega's attempt to be more PlayStation.
Yeah, it's almost
and I think that's why a lot of, because me and Dan have this chat as well, there are Sega fans and there are definitely Dreamcast fans, and you can definitely, the Dreamcast fans, not saying that there isn't Sega fans who also love the Dreamcast, but there's a kind of, you can tell the people who came from PlayStation to Dreamcast and didn't have a Saturn, there's a different mindset, and there's a lot more romanticising, I think, about, you know, Dreamcast and its innovations and things like that. And it did do a lot of innovating, but I think that the Dreamcast definitely tries to be more PlayStation. And I think that it's as if they just tried to abandon all kind of like, it was like a kind of severance point, right, from everything there, bad. From this point on, it's a white console when we totally redesigned the controller, no 6 buttons, and
I mean, I think it's got an identity crisis going on for sure. And I think that Sega was in this kind of like focus group mindset where they're like, tell us what you want us to be, because we don't know who we are, or we know who we have been, but it hasn't been working great for us. But maybe they're looking at all the wrong things. You know, they're thinking that it's who they are that's the problem, when really it's just certain terrible decisions that anybody with half a brain could point out, you know, that they've made. But I mean, you know, it's got 4 controller ports. They're copying the N64 right on the front. I don't think that that's a bad thing, because they went ahead and released a bunch of, you know, multiplayer games that really made use of that. Like the Power Stone games were awesome, you know, Outrigger, you know, countless games that made use of the 4 controller ports. So that's fine. But again, it's definitely I mean, Sony didn't do that. They still released PlayStation 2 with 2 controller ports, and if you want multiplayer, you get a multi-tap, right? But so it's like they were taking and copying little bits of what everybody else was doing and just hoping that it would, be a winning combination, I guess. And so yeah, I do get a sense where they kind of, forgot who they were. But one thing is clear and remains the same, whether it's Master System, Mega Drive, or Dreamcast, and that was that they were always way ahead of everyone in terms of technology and innovation. Yeah. Master System, you had things like the 3D glasses, and you had with the Mega Drive, you had the module on top, the converter, so you could play Master System games, backward compatibility like that. And then you also had, they had the Mega Modem in Japan. We didn't get that. But I mean, there were other things that were definitely, and then Saturn, you had Netlink, and you had the VCD card, and you had built-in memory, and you had all these amazing things about the Saturn. And then, of course, with Dreamcast, they brought us real online multiplayer gaming, too early, I would say, even though it was phenomenal. And I have wonderful memories of playing PSO and stuff like that. It was just, Sony was like, okay, well, we're just going to watch what you're doing, bide our time. And then in a couple years, we're going to hit college campuses really hard and sell the broadband adapter for the Sony PlayStation and SOCOM. And that's what they did. When I was in university, Sony was on campuses at the freshman orientation saying, here, have a free broadband adapter for your dorms, and it was so cheap because I, as a huge Dreamcast fan, I was just like, I hate you guys. Like, I mean, this is brilliant, but I hate you for doing this, that's
the exact same as what, again, Sega did with the Genesis.
Yeah.
If you've watched, there's a Netflix documentary. What's it called again? Can't remember. It's not Console Wars. It's a kind of series. Different kind of. One of them is the Sega, and the other one's Nintendo. Other one's Atari and stuff like that. But on the Sega one, they've got Tom Kalinske on it, and he's kind of talking about the different things that obviously that they did to take on Nintendo. And one of the things that he actually says is we had no, pun intended, we had Sega Guys on college campuses, and we literally had them sent new games, and they were more or less paid to go on college campuses and promote Genesis.
Yep, it was a brilliant idea. I'm sure Steve Race had something to do with it.
Probably, so
because that's the thing is Sony, like, I'm going to defend them for a second here. They were open to the idea of working with Nintendo. They were open to the idea of working with Sega, and they were for a time. And then those things fell out. So they just threw their hands up in the air and said, F it, we're going to do it ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Once that happened, they're like, well, what are we really good at? Spending money. we're not going to try to build up staff from our own farm team or whatever. We're just going to steal theirs. You have a brilliant employee who has led to a certain amount of market share gained over the last couple of years. We're just going to steal him. We'll just offer him more money. And they could do that because it's like you and Dan said, it wasn't just games for them. They had years and years of relationships with retailers. They had leverage because they could threaten. I mean, they could literally say, well, we're already giving you X amount of product in all these different categories. And, so it was just like, they could just lean on those relationships and on the leverage they built. And they didn't have to really worry about whether the game thing fell through because they would survive on all the other stuff that they had. So it was just really kind of just like we're just playing at this, and we'll see what happens. And if you throw enough money at something like that, then it's almost impossible to fail.
Well,
You know?
I mean, you look at the Hideki Sato interview as well that was dug up, was it last year?
Yeah.
And Sega 16 did that brilliant translation on it.
Mhm.
And it was basically, like Kutaragi going to Hideki Sato and saying, just give up, Sato-san.
He did. That's right.
We have factories. We can build CD-ROM drives. We've got the manufacturing plants. We can build an SoC. You have to buy your chips from Hitachi. You have to buy your memory from.
Yes.
You're spending all this money to build it, and we can just give up. Like, no, don't give up. Please don't give up. It's like,
yeah, they had a mutual respect, for sure,
Mm-hmm.
and they had this relationship, and I just thought that was brilliant. A part of the, he's being honest. He's just like, look, it's going to be an uphill battle for you, and we're going to win, and he was right. The other thing is, Sony just didn't make a lot of mistakes. They made good business decisions. It pains me to say it, because I'm not a Sony or PlayStation hater, but it pains me to admit it, because to admit that is to admit that, my company just went completely down the toilet at the hand of this other company that just completely got the better of them at every turn. And it was because they just didn't make mistakes. Sega made so many mistakes. And folks often say it's not one thing that could have, that if you change, could have, changed Sega's fortunes. It's multiple things that they would have had to do differently, because there's just so many cases of mismanagement. This might be a hot take, but I don't personally think that Tom Kalinske deserves as much ire or hate as he gets, for his contribution to the failure. I don't think that he was a perfect CEO, but I think that he did a lot of things right. And I'm not giving him a complete pass either and saying, oh, poor Tom, because he didn't do everything right. But it is true that his hands were tied in a lot of scenarios, and that he was very, very frustrated at that point working with Sega, because they weren't getting games, and they weren't, SOJ just wasn't working with SOA. They just weren't working together the way that they had previously. And,
it's like up to a certain point, and I'm sure I asked Tom and all this whenever we spoke to them last, but, always wondered, obviously Sega of Japan gave Kalinske a lot of kind of leeway. They allowed him to drop the price of the Genesis package and Sonic, so up to a certain point, they allowed Sega of America to pretty much make the decisions for the American market. Mm-hmm. And then, obviously, Saturn launches in Japan, and, Sega were very smart. They siphoned off kind of a bulk of stock. They kept, I think, 300,000 units buy for PlayStation launching, kept 200,000 to 250,000 for launch, and those sold out. But so they were clever. They had like a bulk of stock there. So always wondered, did Sega of Japan look at Sega of America slightly enviously, because the job that the Sega of America done in making the Sega brand a success, a market leader, is something that Japan had never managed to do. So always wondered, was there that bit of animosity there from Sega of Japan, that you've taken our technology and you've made it more successful than we ever managed to. So when it comes to Saturn, we've sold out at launch, we've got a hit product, and you will launch it when we tell you. I just always wondered it, because the dynamic just changed so suddenly.
It's you have to speculate about that, because I think that it's entirely possible, but we don't know for sure. What we do know is that Sega of America wanted to do some things that were really stupid, like putting out the 32X, right? And so the Japanese folks were just like, okay, you guys are really hot on this 32X thing, and I guess we'll put it out, but this is really stupid, and it was really stupid. And then they're like, you want to make this Sega Pluto console that's like a combination of the Netlink thing. Sorry, and they demanded that Sega of Japan make it, and they even wrote on the board, "This is stupid." They wrote like a little message in Japanese that said, "What is this? This is stupid." Paraphrase, but essentially they were just like, "This is ridiculous. It's going to be prohibitively expensive. We can't make this." because Sega of America was so insistent. So I do think that, and Sega of America spent us into a deficit and hadn't turned a profit yet. I pissed Tom off with that question. I was just like, I recognize that the game you were playing was the long game. You were looking at install base over a long period of time, and that when that fruited, you'd have a bunch of software sales, with a huge install base, and eventually you would turn a profit. And he was just like, listen, buddy, we made Sega a ton of money. You can listen. He's just like, I was like, I hit a nerve there, but I was like, but when did you expect to become profitable? Because at the point where Sega of Japan basically took away the remote from you, you still had it hadn't turned into a profit. You were still operating at a deficit, which was just like the American way to do things is, get the install base first, take out loans, work at a deficit until you can turn it around. And again, he wasn't worried because he had done that with companies like Mattel. He was like, I know what I'm doing. You just have to give me enough time to execute my strategy. And again, they got too uncomfortable with it. They were like, I'm sorry, like this, we don't see on the spreadsheet where this starts to chart up, so, and we're bleeding money and hemorrhaging money left and right. So they were just like, let's just take away the control from him. And, so that's the thing is I feel like they really didn't have that faith to allow him to do the same thing at Sega that he did at Mattel, whether or not he would have, I'm not saying that Tom Kalinske was the savior that the Saturn would have needed, but I mean, he definitely turned things around with Genesis and
certainly, certainly better than what Bernie Stoller did.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, and well, that's another thing too, is I don't necessarily think Bernie Stoller necessarily deserves all the hate that he gets, because he did some good things too. And I mean, again, he really was behind the 8 ball when he came into it, so it's like, who would want to inherit that, I don't know.
I think when it comes to Bernie, I think the issue was that he came in and he said no RPGs, but yeah, he had just helped PlayStation launch Final Fantasy VII.
Right.
Obviously, the EGM interview, Saturn's not our future, the 5-point plan that games only passing this would be allowed to be released, and then the big one is that, from what I've read, and people can correct me if this is factually incorrect, but it was Bernie who wanted the RRP for Dreamcast to be $200, not $250.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, already there was talk that Isawakawa particularly didn't want to launch Dreamcast. He'd already been lobbying with Nakayama and then Idamajiri-san after him that we need to get out of this hardware business, and he signed off on Dreamcast, but it wasn't like 100% behind it. And then so you take the R&D for that, and then Bernie pushing for this $199.99 price tag. And I think people blame the Saturn for tanking Sega, but I think in the end it was Dreamcast that kind of was just a step too far. Yeah,
I mean, hot take again, but I think if the Dreamcast had a DVD ROM drive, I would have sold more. Like, I sold a lot of Dreamcasts, I sold a lot of PlayStation 2s, but I would have sold more Dreamcasts if it had had a DVD ROM drive, and folks would not have had the mill CD exploit. And as a result, I think that it wouldn't have been host to so much piracy early on. But
Dave. So, can I just, sorry, please, mate. See, that's the piracy argument. This always makes me laugh.
Right, because at the time, folks weren't really...
had that technology sitting in their bedroom to burn Dreamcast games.
What, mill CD? There was the Utopia boot disc.
But who had DVD burners in 2001?
Well, no, you're right. So that's the thing, is if it had a DVD drive in there, folks, they would have had a comfortable shelf life for that console before folks ever figured out or had the means of burning. That's what I'm saying, is like, because they use the mill CD thing, which like very few things actually end up using, it just opened itself. Not only did it open itself up to piracy, but it also didn't have a DVD drive, which I'm telling you right now, I had with the PlayStation 2 when I worked at Circuit City, it was kind of like the Wii. You know, with the Wii, when that came out, you had grandmothers buying it. You had people who didn't even buy video games, and they were like, "I want to play bowling. That's it." And they'd pick up a Wii just so they could play Wii bowling or Wii tennis. And I had folks coming into the Circuit City, going over to the DVD player section and saying, "Oh my God, this Panasonic costs, $400." Oh wait, over in the game section, there's a PlayStation 2 that plays DVDs and comes with a remote and everything. They're like, sold. They had no plans on playing video games on it. They just wanted a cheap DVD player. And so, I really don't think that can be understated. But unfortunately, it is what it is. We are actually coming right up on time, and I gotta get going. So it's been wonderful having you on, James. Thank you for having this chat and humoring me at the very last minute. I really owe you one.
No problem. I've enjoyed it. Hope the viewers have enjoyed it.
I hope they have. And honestly, I feel like it's never enough time, right? Because I could talk to you about this stuff for another hour, but it's late where you are, and I got to get going. It's movie night for us. Oh, speaking of movie night, Shadow Mask has a movie going on tonight, streaming a VHS. You mentioned it somewhere, but go ahead and mention it again in the chat, Shadow, so that Death Mask tonight. Wait, the game? Or wait, is there a movie called Death Mask? Am I missing something? Anyway, Death Wish. Anyway, Shadow, he streams VHSs every Friday night. So it's Death Wish tonight on VHS. So check that out. You can drop a link in our chat here for folks to click through to after this stream. But anyway, yeah, thanks, James, again. Hopefully I can get on with you guys at some point. I'm going to go ahead and read out our patrons real quick. We've got shouts to Daniel Fredrickson, Theron Brown, David Zaney, Sega Steve, Chris 1997XX, Stone Man, Justin, Nate Lawrence, A Murder of Crows, Kay, Gem Clash or Rank, Cerulean, Normal Guy, Robert Ramsey, Nutrageous, Blue Moon 95, Tanuki Trev, Johannes Fetz, Rowan Dinkt, That Drunk Friend Otaku, Derek Pascarella, aka A-Team, Momdu or Memphis. We got Emerald Nova, and of course, Young Money Swee. We thank all of you guys for supporting us at the $10 or up tier. We really, really do appreciate your financial patronage. And for everybody else, we definitely appreciate you as well. If you can't afford to support us regularly, no biggie. Just go ahead and like the stream and maybe share it with some friends. Help folks find our Discord so that they can join this community. SHIRO is 100% about building the Saturn community and helping kind of like, preach the love of Saturn and love of Sega. As our friends here in the UK, James, the SEGAHolic, and Dan, the Mega Driver. Wonderful content, wonderful podcast. Check out the Sega Guys. They're just hitting you with constant content almost every week. So if you're a Sega fan, you're basically on cloud 9 with everything that's coming out. Check out our podcast. We do stuff too. And I think it's pretty good. We do the Editor's Corner, which is kind of like this. We're just, shooting the breeze based on our memories and stuff. And then of course the mainline podcast released bi-monthly. So just basically once every 2 months, but Peter is heading that up. And then we got SHIRO Show every Friday where we just fly by the seat of our pants and deal with audio issues and all that good stuff. Trekkies, you did just catch the end, but go ahead and listen to it because it was actually a pretty good show today. So again, thanks to everybody. And go definitely sub to the Sega Guys. If you haven't, you're missing a trick if you are sleeping on the Sega Guys. So definitely check them out. And until next time, this is the SEGAHolic and SaturnDave reminding you that you must play Sega Saturn. Until next time, peace.
There you go.
セガサターンしろ